CS5 saw the introduction of a whole new set of brushes. They are called the bristle brushes. These brushes exist in your panel right there. It's the first set of brushes that appear underneath the basic brushes. It's all these strange little icon brushes. Now, choosing any of the brushes and going into the brushes panel, you see that the brush tip shape is where you first come into, and you can see the controls there. Going to any of the other brushes, you see that the controls remain the same as such. But when you access any of the new bristle brushes, that brush tip shape panel changes completely to give you a whole new set of controls to work for these new brushes. These brushes emulate real-world brushes, giving you the ability to control the number of bristles, the length of those bristles, the thickness, the stiffness, and the angle of those particular brushes. You also get this additional little animated preview up here, so that as I'm working with the brush, you can see that it's moving around based on the shape of the brush and how I'm holding it. Now, if you're using a mouse, this window will appear, but it will not be animated. The little brush will be straight up and down, pretty much like that. So, that brings to point the fact that I'm using a tablet, and the tablet has pressure sensitivity and it has a tilt, as you can see the brush tilting around. A mouse does not have pressure sensitivity. It doesn't have a tilt. So you can use these brushes, but you'll be limited on some of the effects that you'll be able to get where you really need a tablet to maximize their effectiveness. Now I'm going to go in here and I'm going to use this brush to go in there and start to create some nice little effects, as you can see, and so on. But what I'm going to do is not actually paint with this brush. What I'm going to do is create a brush tip using this brush, which can then be used with any of the other tools. I'm going to switch over to, say, this guy here, the round curve brush, or this guy, the flat curve brush. Doesn't matter, because I'm going to manipulate this so strongly it's going to do all kinds of weird stuff. So tell you what, we'll go back to that round curve. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce the number of bristles way down. I'm going to bring down their thickness, and I am going to go in there and bring up their spacing. In fact, let's use one that's a little more of a fan kind of a thing. In fact, we'll use the fan brush, right? The round fan. So I'm going to bring down the number of bristles. Got their length down, the thickness. I'm going to bring the stiffness way down. I don't want it to be stiff at all. I'm going to play around with this angle. I'm also going to go in there and increase their spacing, so I start to get more of this kind of an effect. And you can see what it's starting to create now. I might want to increase their length again. There we go. So I get that nice length going there. All right, so now with that in mind, I got in my shape dynamics where I have the angle. I'm going to set the angle to direction. So it's going to actually follow my brush the way I'm going to manipulate it around. So let's just close this down. I'm going to just go in here and just kind of doodle around until I get this kind of a weird little shape like that. There it is. That is my brush tip. That's what I want it to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that and go over and say define brush preset. And we're going to call this fur. So now I could just dump these guys. Don't want to see them. There we go. And I'm going to get some text. I'm going to type in right here, furry friends. Now I've chosen a font that's fairly thin. I got Helvetica Neue Light. I made a nice large size of it. I'm going to increase their spacing just a little bit. I'm going to go in there and just get all these letters together here, and I'm going to go into my character. I'm going to increase the space between the letters. They're kerning. I'm going to bring it to about plus 25 just to give them a little more room like that. That looks good. So now that I see them, I'm going to put them in position right about there and maybe go in there and just make them a little longer. Let's do a little scale, make it a little taller, bring them up like that, bring it down, just so that we kind of fill up the screen like that. That looks good. Right there like that. All right, so now what I have here is not exactly what I'm going to use. The text itself is of no use for me. So what I'm going to go up to my layers here and I'm going to say type create work path. That created a path, which I now see here. There's my path. So in my layers, I can dump the text. I really don't need the text because I have a path. Now, I might want to go in there and modify this path, which I can. Let's select this whole set of the paths right there and bring it down a little bit closer to the rest of the stuff here. And take the bottom of the F right here and kind of extend that a little bit. Since it is a path, I can do that. Just take that one and we'll extend this one down just a little just like that. So we have a little more character to our text. So now we're going to go in there and modify this with our brush. Let's save that path and turn it off for now. In my layers, I'm going to take my background and I'm going to invert it. Then I'm going to create a new layer right on top of it, and this is where I'm going to create my new text. I got my path. There's the path, so I can see it again. I'm going to go and pick some colors for myself here. I'm going to get a nice, kind of an orangey, nice color like that for my foreground, and for my background, I have the default of white. Now I'm going to go to my paintbrush tool, and I'm going to choose that tip that I just created right there. It appears at the end. Nice and big like that, which right now is going to create that kind of an effect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my brushes panel where I'm going to modify this so it's going to make a big difference in the way it appears. Let's make the size a little smaller and we can see the stroke that it's creating now, right? So I'm going to randomize this. I'm going to go into my shape dynamics where I'm going to give it an angle jitter. Now you see that it's affecting each tip individually. So I'm going to go all the way to 100% so that each tip is following a different direction than its neighbors to the left and right. Same thing with the size jitter. I'm going to increase it just to about 52% so that each tip is a different size than its neighbors on either side. Give it a little spacing as well. Let's go in there and just give it a little spacing just so that we can see the distinct tips like that. Then I'm going to go down here to my color dynamics where I'm going to say between the foreground and background, which right now are the orange and the white, I'm going to go in there and say jitter between those two, 100%. I'm going to bring my hue slider down to 0. I don't want to affect the hue at all, but I do want to affect the saturation just a little and the brightness a little. Again, each tip is going to be affected independently of the ones to either side of it. So now that I have all these settings for my brush, I can turn this off, make sure I'm in the layer for my text, and I take the path. I have the brush selected as the current tool, so I say stroke it, and I get my nice little furry friends. Now, it looks a little chaotic, no problem. Undo that and make that brush much smaller. Right there. Now it's about the size of the strokes themselves, maybe a tiny bit smaller. Do it again, and there we see that we have these nice little furry text saying furry friends, and it's a little more descriptive because we have a brush tip that kind of has that furry look to it. Now, this is a technique that I use to create one of the many billboards that are in Times Square. That actual billboard, we'll see right here. There's the billboard, Furball the Musical. Now, this, of course, doesn't exist. It's just a little tribute to all my cats that I've had throughout my life. And to see it in the actual painting, we'll look at the painting here. And that particular billboard is way up in here. We'll kind of zoom into this little area right there. As we get in closer, you'll see that there's the little Furball the Musical right there. It's really tiny, but it's effective and it is pretty legible. So in the overall painting, which spans 25 feet, it's this little thing way down in there.